Hi guys, I'm Mikey Microphone, and the microphone is a metaphor for the fact that you have something beautiful to say, but you need to make the arrangements so that you can be heard. When I finished the last video, I was looking into how my data got out of sync when I was deleting and reordering paragraphs in a section that I had made to illustrate some of my editing tools for authors. Now, right after I stopped the video, I realized that the reason that the data had gotten out of sync was because when I deleted, when I, so I had refactored my tool for deleting paragraphs, and the first two times that I used it, there was a bug in the code which stopped the code before it was able to reorder the other paragraphs. So that happened twice. That's why there was a discrepancy of 2 in the data. And so we have 3, 4, 5 instead of 1, 2, 3. This section here is the table of contents data that are establishing the order of paragraphs within section number 79. And so I could update these through a little bit of Ruby code, but it'll be faster to do it this way. Instead of 3, 4, 5, I'll just make it 1, 2, and 3. And now if I refresh this, if I move this up here, and then if I refresh this data, look down here, we have 3, 1, and 2. No 4s, no 5s, no gaps. And at this point, I'm confident that that's working well enough to move on to the next goal. So in the last video, we updated our remove link so that so you can see by looking at the status bar at the bottom of my browser, you can see this link contains book ID, chapter ID, edition ID, and section ID. And then over further to the left, next to the paragraphs, it's 515. That is the paragraph ID. So there's 5 IDs there that are part of the system's ability to establish not only which paragraph I'm editing, but which book and chapter I'm editing it within. Because the way this system is architected, a single paragraph could appear in multiple books. A single paragraph could appear in multiple chapters within the same book. So there's a good discussion of that in the last video. And generally, these videos are designed to be watched in order. But I will keep giving you enough, hopefully I'll give you enough context to follow along with each one. So you don't have to necessarily worry about following them in order. I'm not going to explain all of my programming and Ruby tools. Even if you go all the way back to the beginning, there's some things that you might not know yet. What I'm going to try to do is bit by bit, I'll explain some of the details of how to do Ruby programming so that you'll see it a few times, you'll start to get the idea, and then I'll kind of give you all the lingo so you can discuss with other developers and search for more information by using the correct lingo. And I'll show you how I do it because most of the things I do, there's a pretty good reason for it. And I love talking about it. If you have any questions, there's a lot of ways to contact me, and as long as you get my attention, I will answer your question. So we have successfully refactored the remove link. Maybe for the next one, we can do the promote link. So I'm going to look at the code where the promote is being executed. So the first thing is grabbing the table of content. That's the part that we know we can simplify. And the way that we're going to do that is by, rather than specifying all 5 of these IDs, we're just going to need to specify basically one. We're probably going to still pass in the paragraph ID just because with the way that these link helpers are structured, it is looking for a paragraph to just kind of structure the link. But on the server side, we may not even really use the paragraph ID because we're going to be performing the edit on the actual table of contents. When we promote things, it changes the order that they appear within the section. So all we're doing is not changing the paragraph, we're just changing the ordering, which is stored on the table of contents data. So you can see here in the table of contents table, the ordering field is right here. And that is all that we're really updating within the promote action. So promote starts by grabbing the table of content. You figure out what the previous position is. The previous position that that content was in. Previous table of content is the preceding paragraph. And then you update one, then you update the other. So the paragraphs are going to switch positions. And so I see no reason why this won't be possible to refactor in the same way that we refactored destroy. So destroy, you see, okay, so in this one you see we have book ID, edition ID, paragraph ID, chapter ID, section ID. We have all of these IDs being passed around so that we can establish that we're modifying the correct table of contents. But we're going to refactor that so we don't need to be so verbose. We're going to be accomplishing the same thing, but just going more directly to the source. So looking at the template, the promote link is right here. And I'm going to cut out all these IDs. And I'm going to replace that with this, just like what we did in the remove link. And I'll refresh this real quick just to make sure that renders. And then you can look down at the bottom there, and now it just has table of content ID. And then on the back end, the controller action, which is handling that request, we're going to replace this with table of content.find, just similar to what we did here. And this copy and pasting is giving you a hint that we might be able to do further refactoring later on. So that's pretty exciting. Previous position, that'll still work. Previous table of content. Okay, so this will not still work because we've cut out these IDs. And in the last video, I did this in 2 steps, where first I ascertained these IDs from this piece of data. But what I've also done is added a method to the table of content model that can find the subsequent entries for that section, as it were. And so let's go ahead and try to do that again. So def previous prior. I'm going to say prior because prior is it's a little more clear that there could be multiple things here. Previous, I think, sounds like it's the one that immediately precedes it. Prior is more plural. So, as I suggested in the previous video, we are able to reuse this. I'm going to go ahead and extract that into its own method. And So this is going to be the same query, except rather than looking for ordering values that are greater than the current TOC, we're going to look at ones which are less. And I'll refer to the code that I already had here to make sure that let's see. Okay, great. So in this case, I'm actually not looking for multiple TOCs. I'm looking for the one that was immediately prior to it. So previous can go ahead and be that method. Not sure if it will be useful to me, but I'm going to leave it there so that I have kind of this pair here, which gives me both of those groups. And then I'm going to make this method kind of piggyback on this one to grab just one that's immediately prior. So I'll take prior ordering. I might already have a scope that orders them in that way. Maybe that can be my next refactor. And then, yeah, I'll do that right now. What the heck? Scope ordered, lambda, ordering. That probably makes no sense to most of you, but what it's doing is creating a clause of the SQL query that will order the data that's given back to me. And the order that I want them in is by this field ordering, low to high. And then I'll just grab the last one out of that because the highest out of the previous ones is going to, the highest out of the prior ones is going to be the previous. So the way, and I'll just add one more detail regarding Ruby database programming. This method is using scopes. It uses where again. So it's possible that it will return a scope, and then I can tack on this other scope, and those scopes will all be combined into a single database query. And that is one of the strengths of scopes, is that you can separate your logic out into different chunks, but then it still only executes a single database query, which is the most efficient way to manage your database. In the past, Ruby had a slight problem where there was a large number of queries being done subsequently, so that we could separate the logic into all the different files where it made sense. And now with the scopes, we can do it simultaneously. So I'm going to go ahead and test this out in the console to see if that is indeed working the way that I want. I'll reload it to get all my new code that I just wrote. And I'll grab a TOC that I know has previous data. I'll look here in my database and say, so this is number 3, number 2617. So TOC number 2617. TOC equals table of content dot find 2617. Okay, I had a spelling mistake. Save that, reload that. TOC.prior, TOC.previous. Okay, so it looks like they both work. And 2616, that is indeed the one that is prior to 3. And previous should give me 2613 and 2616. So we have 2616 and 2613. Great. So I can now replace this with table of content.previous. And then the rest of this should work fine. I can look at the JavaScript that runs after this method is complete and see which objects it is referring to. So previous table of content, that one is still being defined in the controller. Table of content, that one is still being defined. So I expect this to still work. So if I promote this, so visually it worked. If I refresh this, okay, it was stable enough for that. And then if I refresh this, look down here, and the reordering seems to have taken hold. So we can go ahead and save all this new code. Okay, this is actually some of the code that I wrote in the last video as well as the new stuff. And let's see, delete paragraph. Promote paragraph by TOC reference. Okay. So the next one that I want to tackle is delay. So I'll look at how that link is constructed here. Delay. So it has book ID, edition ID, chapter ID, section ID, and then there's this if statement. And what that is alluding to is similar to what we've just done for previous. It's like prior, except it's just one. So we can make this, it's like subsequent, but it's just one. So I could say next, tailing, following, thesaurus. Table of content dot next, that's a little too, following, succeeding. That's nice and positive. I like succeeding. I like succeeding. Yes, this paragraph is succeeding. Absolutely. He succeeded to the throne. Yeah, he did. So I think my main question about using this terminology is whether it implies plurality. So like I said, prior felt like a plural noun, whereas previous was more singular to me. I think succeeding is good for what I need it for. It sounds singular. So I'm going to say subsequent dot ordered dot first, because out of all the subsequent ones, I just want the one that is lowest in ordering. I want the person who's next in line for the throne, not their children or their great-grandchildren. I want the next one. So the first person to succeed. Yes, excellent. So let's see if we can refactor that one now. Succeeding. So we're going to just attach this onto paragraph dot table of content delay. Okay, great. Succeeding. Okay, so now this reads this method here with all of these arguments there, that's the method that creates the link, will be executed if there is a table of content that is succeeding this one. And my way of testing this, kind of a quick and dirty way to test this, is that, so I know that these paragraphs are currently not receiving a delay link because there is no section after this section. I know that these paragraphs are currently receiving a delay link because there is a section after these sections. So if I just refresh this and no errors are displayed during the rendering of this page, I can see the delay link is here, the delay link is here. Okay, interesting. So now we have delay links here. So the logic is not the same as it was before. So take a look at why that is the case. Okay, so succeeding.present. Okay. So it might be the case subsequent. Okay, so this all right, so I don't have a clear theory about why this is behaving differently. So let's try out a little bit of debugging to see what we can see and see how quickly we can determine what's up. Okay, so here in this edit template, okay, so I can more rapidly debug this in a chapter that doesn't have multiple sections. Okay, so this one is all one section. Nope, it's not. There's a pull request section. This one is all one section. So if I now, the first time this method is called will be when it is about to render this link. So if I jump into the debugger when that method is executing, I will be able to see what the data shows about that context. So I'll say by bug, which activates the debugger, and then I'll just go ahead and refresh this page, and you'll see it hangs here right when it's starting to load, and when I go into the server log here, I can use list to print out the code where I'm at, and it actually printed out the code after because it already printed this part. So I'll say subsequent, and that includes a table of content that has an edition ID, chapter ID, section ID of nil. Okay. So what it has shown me is that the query I created to establish the siblings of this container is not specific enough to exclude its parents. I only wanted siblings. I didn't want parents. But what I got was siblings and parents. Not grandparents, but parents. What I wanted was data where, so let's say I'm dealing with this section. What I wanted was data where the section ID is present, but the paragraph and citation ID is not present. But what I got was section ID either present or not present, and paragraph and citation is not present. So this query, and this is ultimately, this is why I created these scopes: edition-ish, chapter-ish, section-ish, paragraph-ish, and citation-ish. See, they begin by specifying section ID is not nil. And that is actually the exact situation that I'm in right now. What I need is data where section ID is not nil. What this method is giving me includes a piece of data where, oh, here we are on the left side, where the section ID is nil. Okay, so let's revisit my code to see if we can cleanly establish that prerequisite. Okay, so we know the content identifier. That is the same as the one that needs to be not nil. So let's go right for the throat. Where.not content identifier is nil. Okay, great. And then I will, even though I haven't tested this code yet, I'm going to just preemptively mirror it into this position. And I'm going to hit cont, continue. Since this link is being rendered multiple times on the page, I had to do that a few times because each time the by bug was triggering. So by bug triggered for this, then for this, then for this. That's why I had to continue multiple times. In order to avoid that, I'm going to try loading it here. Okay, so now this looks correct. I'll move back into a chapter which has multiple sections, and we can see delay is present here, and it is not present here. So this seems to be correct, and I feel like I understand how this bug happened, so now I'm pretty confident that we have resolved it. We have succeeded. Okay. So I haven't finished refactoring this controller yet, have I? Delay. Okay, great. So this is totally full of IDs. So these links are not going to work. So this would be a bad time to commit the code. So let's continue refactoring. So the table of content begins by establishing which table of content we are dealing with. Continues by seeing the position that thing is in, establishing which section it's in, the subsequent section, the last position of a paragraph in that section, and then this content is moved to that section beyond that last paragraph. So when you move it into the next, when you delay it into the next paragraph, it starts out at the end of that section. And then you have to kind of reorder it within that. It might make sense to move it into the first paragraph of that section, but I wasn't totally convinced that that was better. So this is how it works for now. after it moves this paragraph, it then reorders the paragraphs that were after it in the section that it was in. So this part we can basically mirror from what we did in destroy. We can simplify this code a little bit into just this. Basically just get rid of this line. Okay, so I think this looks like it will work with the new strategy, and so I'll go ahead and update the link itself so that it carries the correct data. I can remove 1, 2, 3, 4 IDs and replace them with this. Refresh this to make sure that the links still render with no syntax errors. And then you can see there in the status bar that they just contain one ID plus the paragraph ID. Then I can go to the controller. I'll replace this with a find params table of content ID. And then let's move into this logic here. So we no longer have this book ID in hand, edition ID. Let's see if we can establish this piece of content that we need without individually pulling those IDs out of this object. So what we want is section-ish, which means paragraph ID is nil, and what it is it's the section-ish TOC for the section that that paragraph is in. Okay, we might need to continue reusing all these IDs. But I don't think we do. If we look at the table of content model and we think about writing a method that will just go one step up the hierarchy and then give you the container, give you the TOC for the positioning of the container. I think what we can, again, lean on these content attributes being mirrored from TOC to TOC and just adjust things from there. So what we want is self.class.where content attributes. The content attribute that we want to remove is, again, the content identifier. So in this case, the content identifier is a paragraph ID. We want to grab a TOC which has the same book ID, same edition ID, same section ID, and same chapter ID, but nil for the paragraph ID. So that I can just append that here, where content identifier is nil. Okay. See how nice and generalized this code is? This could work for anything. If it works. So section. Okay, so should we test this in the console? Yeah, let's test it in the console. Let's not get too... So reload. And this is fun. Now that we have our table of contents being delayed right in our status bar, I can look right at the bottom of the screen and see 2291. toc.parent. See if it works. Okay, so it returned 2289. Book ID, just print this one out to compare. Book ID is the same, edition ID is the same, chapter ID is the same. Section ID is the same. Paragraph ID for this TOC is 215. For this one, it's nil. So that is what I wanted. That's exactly correct. And it gave me a relation, right? So it gave me a group. Now the group happens to have one thing in it, but it's still a group. So I need to perform, I need to, actually, yeah, I know a good way to do this. So each TOC is only going to have one parent. So I can just replace find where with find by, and I can go ahead and remove the parentheses since that is my prerogative. And that ought to, okay, so I have to reload this, call this again, and great, so now we got a table of content. Instead of a relation, we just got the exact one. So alternately, it would have been simple to kind of say where and then say first, but I think this is slightly preferable. Who knows? Okay, so we got the parent, so I can now plug that into my code here. Section equals table of content.parent. Subsequent section. Now we already wrote some code to go into the ordering on the siblings and grab the next one, so I can replace this too. Section dot succeeding. Right, is that what I called it? Yes. Okay, so I'm getting a little little dissonance here because this object is actually not a section, it's a table of content. So I think I might rename this, and I think what I might rename it to is parent. And this is kind of a preview of how I can cross-apply this logic to other controllers that I have, which are not for paragraphs, but for things like sections and chapters. Or citations. Citations is a better example for delay. If you want to move a citation onto a subsequent paragraph, that is something that a normal author might want to do in their normal course of doing their normal work. Looking at line 24 here and seeing what's happening. Last position. So that's finding the final child in the subsequent paragraph. And you can see I used the ID here to establish that that is the section that we're looking in. We're looking for paragraph-ish TOCs, and we're looking to order them and then find the last one. And then if there is a last one, that's what this and is. If this is here, then we call this method. Okay, so do I want to write a helper method to establish the final child, the youngest child, final child, last child? Last child. I think that is pretty unambiguous, whether you're talking about ordering last child. And that is also familiar to developers because it's used in the CSS lingo. Sounds like a general enough concept that it is usable. Okay, so the children they're going to have all the same content attributes except for the one following the content identifier. So for a section, the children of that section are going to have the same book ID, same edition ID, same chapter ID, same section ID, but not the same paragraph ID. However, they are going to have the same citation ID because we're not looking at grandchildren, just children. So last child. So I can do something similar to this, except instead of differing by this attribute, it's going to differ by the one following it. So I need to establish a way to find the one that's following it. And I feel like I may have already written some code that does this. Let's look at is there a helper? I think I actually may have written that in order to get the, see how that says add to section, that says add to chapter. Maybe not. It's almost like I wrote this, but then erased it. Okay. Suppose I didn't write it. And if I did, I'll just refactor it later. So what did I, there we go. Okay, so content identifier, child identifier, def child identifier. And here I basically have to create just a little lookup table. There's no logic within this system that knows the hierarchy from book to edition, chapter, section, paragraph, citation. So I'll just make a little lookup table. And there's a common way to format this stuff, I guess, which would be like this. You've noticed I often put these things just on one long line, but I'll experiment with this, see how I like it. Chapter ID points to section ID. It would be kind of cool to write this method without the ID, so I would just say book points to edition, edition points to chapter. But for now, this is good. Section ID points to paragraph ID. Paragraph ID points to citation ID. And then we access one of these by passing in one of these. So I'll go ahead and pass in content identifier so that we'll get the child. So I'll go ahead and factor this out right now. Yeah, actually another thing that would be cool to refactor is to see how these are all going in this order. Book. Actually, these are going in reverse order. Citation, paragraph, section, book. But these are, man, this is also in reverse order. Anyway, we can do this one thing at a time. Factor this out and say, I'll put it below content identifier. Content hierarchy. Okay, so this hierarchy is child content child Okay, so successor, I don't want to use that in two different. So when you think about a king and a prince, you think the child succeeds the throne, but actually the brother, I guess in Game of Thrones the brother goes after the child, but I'm using successor as the brother in my code, so I don't want to use successor again. I'll just stick with this method name for now. I don't think it's grammatically perfect, but it is pretty clear what's happening. The reason I thought about renaming it is because I want the name to describe not what's in here, but what's coming out of here. And what's coming out of here is based on what you pass in. When you pass in the parent, you get the child. So I thought the method name should reflect the fact that it's giving you the child, not just giving you the scheme. But on the other hand, if you call the method without putting this on the end of it, it will give you the whole scheme. So this is a totally acceptable compromise. And I've now lost 33% of you. But no, you guys are smart. I've only lost 21%. And you guys can just write in the comments, and the other 79% will say, here's what this guy meant when he was talking about children and brothers. So the last child is going to be self.class.where content attributes except child identifier. And then I have to say where child identifier is not nil. I'm trying to think if that's actually kind of implied, because if it has all the same attributes, okay, so this query would actually include itself. So I do have to say child identifier is not nil, because I don't want to include the section in the list of children that are being considered. Child identifier is nil. And then I'll say ordered, so that they line up in the order that they are in the book. Say last. Okay, so let's jump in our handy dandy database and find a good way to test this out. So here's a section with many paragraphs. Section number 7. Section number 7's position is established by TOC 2567. TOC.lastChild. Okay, so it gave me a result, 2568, which is correct. So I'm not totally confident that this code is right, but it looks pretty much, it looks pretty feasible that it could be. And so I can say last position. So this is not only taking the, I'm not replacing this part of the code, I'm just replacing this part of it. Subsequent section.lastChild. Okay, so I was thinking that there might not be a subsequent section, but actually that's handled prior to this code even running, because the delay link doesn't appear for people where there's no subsequent section. So I'm cool with that. It might not have a last child, which is true. It's possible for a section to have no paragraphs. That's how they are generated when they first create them. So that's actually a very common scenario for this editing tool. If you want to add sections, they start off with nothing, then you have to push everything in. And that's why the 2i is here, because if the ordering is nil, then this will turn it into 0. So that's what that is. Update attributes, table of contents, sequence section, next. And then this part, we can replace this with this. And now that I've gotten rid of the variable called subsequent, I can rename this variable to subsequent. And now the only thing about this code which is specific to this controller that couldn't work for a section or a citation controller is this right here. Section ID, section ID. So that is pretty exciting, if it works. Let's see if it works. So let's see if delaying things will now work. Okay. Okay, so visually it did the right thing on the front end. I'll refresh this to see if the data in the database gives me the right results. I'll go into my server log. So this is the log from the refresh. I'll look prior to that to see what happened when I did the delay. Okay, so it loaded some stuff, paragraph, table of contents, load, load, load. It updated table of contents. And it didn't update anything else because there was nothing after that paragraph that needed to be reordered. Let's see what happens in a case like this, where this one will have to be reordered. Now let's see if this makes sense in another chapter. A lot of my chapters don't have sections. So the delay thing is not really showing up in most of these. Okay. Whatever. Getting things a little out of sync, but I'll just work from a backup. This is my local data, by the way, not the online edition of the book. So if I delay this, make a little gap in my server log here, delay this, and what happened was update table of contents. Okay, so I'm only seeing one update here. I'm curious if this one has now been reordered. So I'm going to look at the ID here, table of content 2159. Where ID equals 2159. Okay, so it's staying on ordering number 2. It didn't get reordered to number 1. And let's look at what's in this section. Okay, so there's a couple different editions here, 5 and 6. The 6 is the current one. So yeah, this is the only thing in that section, and it should be order number 1, but it's order number 2. So the code that I wrote for this part didn't work. Okay, and I think I know why. because by the time we had updated it, the subsequent logic was now operating within a different section. So the question is, should I move this? If I move this whole block of code up above this line, that'll probably still be okay. There's nothing logically preventing two TOCs from occupying the same ordering slot. All the ordering is being managed directly, so there's nothing that prevents them from having the same ordering. Not right now. But I think what's a more future-proof solution is to say, I'm going to use subsequent for the same meaning that I have here, and I'm going to use succeeding for the same meaning that I have here. So subsequent goes here, succeeding goes here. Okay. So now let's jump into, here we go. So if I now delay this, and now I look at 2296, ordering is 1. Okay, so the reordering piece worked. I can refresh this page and just see that those things stay in the same order. I think that was correct. And just in case you're wondering, the way for me to move this, paragraph back into this section, have you figured it out? Because delay moves it into the next section. So how do I move it into the previous section? Well, the way that I do it is I move that section before the other one, and I delay this into this one, and I push it back up to the top where it was. Then see this one currently doesn't have a promote, so this is a case where I have to refresh to get my interface. Promote, and now this is back at the beginning where it started. So it's a multi-step process because promote and delay are only one direction each. I don't have the up and down interface. Although now that I've written all these helper methods, maybe it would be easier for me to go there. I'm just chipping off these things as I need them, and that was all the interface that I needed to do what I needed to do. Took me a while to realize that I could do that, to reorder them and then delay it in there, but I was like, ooh, awesome. It is complete. Okay, so the logic is ready. I'm not sure why I added these extra lines here. So as I commit this, I'll just point out that like code like this can be kind of a mind twister. And I'm glad that I wrote the code naively first and then refactored it into a generalized approach. I go back and forth on whether that should be my strategy sometimes, but at this point what I usually do is I just go direct for what I'm doing, and then I take a step back and say like, oh, could this be done better? I end up writing the code twice, but it's okay. And of course, another really good way to, it needs to be said, another really good way to give yourself that test harness so that you can check your work right away and see if it did what you expect is to write tests. You can write code that tests your code, and the tools that support this particular framework, Rails and Ruby, the tools that support that approach are fantastically mature. Part of the reason I didn't get into the habit of doing that is because many of the times when I tried it like 8 years ago, it was frustrating and confusing. But the tools are really good now, and I do recommend them. I am planning to utilize tests and specs for this project, and hopefully I will be able to make some videos that show how I retrofit a spec suite onto a project like this. Because as you got a little bit of a glimpse today, there is kind of a lot of code here. I've been working on this more than I anticipated, and when I write new code, sometimes it breaks my old code. It happens all the time. So having a test suite is something that is going to alleviate my burden. And making some videos where I show how to retrofit it is, I think, going to be a very popular series because there's a lot of people who need to know how to do that. You know, they start writing their code, they might try testing, they might not, but they don't continue with it, and then they get into a place where they need it, and they have to figure out how to do it, retrofit it. You know, a lot of people actually say you shouldn't test while you're just starting your project, so this will be relevant for those people too. I mean, if I had written tests around all of this stuff and then ended up changing it, that might have been a lot of work. So that's another reason why people think the test should sometimes follow the code like a few steps behind. Okay, so I'm going to stick with this naming convention here. Promote paragraph by TOC reference. Delay paragraph by TOC reference. And I'm going to go ahead and deploy that code to my server. And that is basically going to be my sign off for now. The next thing, so I've now refactored remove, promote, and delay. Logically, the next one to refactor would be edit, or maybe I could go to the sections controller and start to refactor promote and remove. I think we'll do edit next, so watch out for that in the next video. And in the meantime, go to wayswemage.com and suggest some additions to my lists, because I'll show you what's there. So you just click right here on lists. You've got your example